New hire onboarding is a mess in most organizations. And most of them don't even understand why or how. In fact, very often the feedback they get from new participants after onboarding is really positive. They'll talk about how great it was. We'll get to that in a second. But the reality is, in most cases, sellers come out no better equipped to sell their product than they were when they began on day one. In fact, in most cases, they are worse off. They are more confused. They have more information floating around their head that they have not figured out how to do something with. And so here's what it sounds like when we have these conversations with new sellers. We'll ask them, how was your onboarding? Or tell us about your onboarding. And they'll say, oh, it was great. Company was amazing. You may have heard something like this before, by the way. It was so great. We drank from the fire hose, blah, blah, blah. So much information, great culture, company, people, whatever. And then we ask them specifically, what'd you learn? And they still usually have a good answer for this, by the way. New hires in particular tend to be advocates for their company as long as they still want the job. It has nothing to do with how good the onboarding was and everything to do with how they feel they'll be perceived based on their answers. So these answers tend to be really positive. Oh, it was great. So what specifically did you learn? Well, we learned how to engage with customers. We learned how to understand their needs. We learned how to tell the company's story, and so on and so forth. And then the fun question comes, because we say, excellent. What does that sound like in practice? That's where we get the deer in the headlights look. All right, what do you mean? Well, you're with a customer. What do you actually say? Again, deer in the headlights. I don't understand the question. Well, let's just take, you said you learned how to tell the company story. What does that sound like? And this is where it's a fish out of water, because they were taught concepts that it's important to engage the customer. And they may have even been told stories of how other people did it. They were taught the concept of how important it is to understand customer needs. And they were probably given examples of other people who had done that well. And same thing with telling the company story. But they were never put in a position where they had to do it and had to do it well and were tested on it. And this is where it gets crazy, because when we double click with a client and say, okay, great. So it sounds like your people are a little uncomfortable after 3 months or 2 months or whatever it was of onboarding in giving a pitch for your company or preparing for a discovery conversation and knowing what questions in what sequence to ask. And so we'll say, all right, let's just double click on a few areas. Let's do a little spot check with your onboarding. And we'll look at things like their pitch and their discovery and presentations and demos and what have you. And not surprisingly, almost everything that would be required to make an effective training that taught a person how to do the things that they're supposed to do, those elements are absent. When we ask them, let's look at the pitch, for example, and we say, okay, let's take a look at the content that they learned around the pitch. What was their pre-work? Usually nothing. What were they taught in terms of a framework for it? Also usually absent. What elements were they given? And this is where there's usually quite a bit, by the way. There's lots of documents and SharePoint sites and PowerPoint presentations and outlines of how other people have done it that they could choose from, but they're required to distill it down. So nothing weaponized, nothing ready for use for the seller. Same thing with the activities. So how did you actually see them learn and deliver these things? Usually absent. Same with follow-up assignments. Usually it's something vague like, all right, well, now that you've seen all the information on how to pitch the company, make sure that you own it. That's a nonsense assignment, by the way. Make sure that you own it. In what way? If you're not specific about what they need to do, you are failing them. And then the most important one that is universally missing, with all but the rare exceptions, is an objective, quantifiable, measurable test for each of these things. So if we identify there are 4 conversations that an AE needs to be great at, we should know what good looks like for each of those. We should have a test for them. We should be able to see if they are objectively executing those the right way. For something like an initial pitch or an elevator pitch, that should be really easy. It's only a handful of steps. You can identify the elements that need to be in each one of those, and anyone, even if they're not a sales expert, can come in with that list and listen to a person give a pitch and check off the things that need to be there. It's that simple. But it doesn't exist in most of these onboarding programs. And that is a problem, because what ends up happening, as we alluded to at the beginning of this video, was they will exit their onboarding feeling good about the company. Remember, not because they learned so much or they're better equipped to do their job, but because they want to be here, because they chose this company, they've invested in it, and they want to be right, and they are also worried about how others might perceive them. So there is only one answer they can give you in most cases, and that was, it's awesome. What a great experience. Met so many wonderful people. Feel like I'm drinking from the fire hose, by the way, which is code for you've given me a ton of information and nothing to do with it. And so they enter the field, and now they've got to figure out all this garbage. They have to figure out what they do first, because they're not even equipped for day one activities. They don't know how to effectively, if they need to reach out to clients, for example, they've never learned specifically how that needs to happen, what good looks like. And this is a shame, because your company has a wealth of experience. You have people that know how to do this. It just likely needs to be distilled down into a form that a new person can grasp, internalize, and execute immediately. So, what does good onboarding look like? Well, that's a topic for another day, but I will tell you what good looks like when that person comes out of training, because that's where we started this. When they come out of training and someone says, "How was it?" they'll have all their good flowery things to say. And then when someone asks, "What does that mean in practice?" they'll say, "Pick a conversation." Pitch? Great. Here's what it sounds like. And they'll give a pitch. Discovery conversation? Here's how I prepare. Here's what the pre-call research looks like. Here's how I know I'm always asking great questions. We learned rules that dictate our behavior so that we know, I can know as I'm asking a question, whether it's going to be engaging or whether it's going to be a conversational thud. Presentations? Easy. Here's how I plan. Here's what it looks like. Here are the things that most people don't do, and here's how we do them better. And they'll be able to give you specifics. You can put them on the spot because they have already been tested. They have shown that they can pass those things. These are not just concepts floating around in their heads. These are skills that they have, I almost said mastered. These are skills that they are in the process of mastering, but know well enough to step right into the field on day one and execute as well or better compared to most other sellers that they'll be competing with. And that is a beautiful thing. That is a seller who's going to accomplish things immediately. They're week one, they'll have real wins because they're not figuring out how to do things. They are executing things they've already learned how to do well.